Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar in the Public Safety Innovation Series. Our topic today will run at most 1 hour, about 40 minutes for a presentation, and we will take questions for 20 minutes after the presentation, or as long as those go. You can, just a quick note, you can type your question in the lower left-hand box. There's a chat window. And so if any of you have questions anytime during the presentation when Mr. Booth is speaking, you can type your question in there and hit send, and then my team here will compile those questions, and we will try and answer as many of those as we have time for at the end of the presentation. Just a quick note, my name is Ari Vidali. I am CEO of Envisage Technologies, and I will be your host today. Our company is Envisage Technologies, and we create technology solutions for public safety training centers. We started this particular series because we're really passionate about spreading good ideas for public safety. We fundamentally believe that readiness does save lives and are committed to improving public safety through innovation. Today's webinar is no exception. For those of you that are running a training center, you're directly responsible for the quality of public safety within your state or your area. What you do during your tenure, either leading or supporting the training function, will directly affect the quality of training first responders or officers receive and the lives of the citizens that they serve. Now, we work with many of these training academies and training centers, and we consistently find that you are faced with two major headwinds in executing your mission. Costs are rising, and that's pretty much universal everywhere, and budgets for many of you are in decline. This is unsustainable and is having a negative impact on our public safety world. The only way to change this equation is to innovate and look at new and exciting ideas that can help training centers remain vibrant well into the future. The course you take now as a leader or someone supporting training not only impacts the current, but also the next generation of firefighters, law enforcement officers, dispatchers, corrections officers. They are your legacy, along with a center that is sustainable, modern, and provides the best training first responders can receive. That is why it is such a pleasure to introduce Bill Booth, President of Interact Business Group. He's a 25-year veteran in the industry. His company has helped numerous government agencies and municipalities plan, budget, and build world-class training facilities all over the U.S. Bill brings a wealth of insight into innovative public safety training models, new ideas for cost savings, creative partnerships, and technologies that work. Bill, it's really great to have you, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you, Ari. I do appreciate it, and I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with the group today. I think we'll speak around 30 minutes, and as Ari mentioned, with questions at the end, be happy to answer whatever we can. But I want to begin today and kind of set the outline and framework for the presentation. I'm going to talk about four basic discussion areas. Number one is the importance and overlooked side of your annual operational and maintenance costs of operating a training center, or your O&M budgets. The second item I'm going to talk about today is a concept that we call the Readiness Gap. Now, the Readiness Gap is the cost between, or the differences between costs, budgets, and revenue, and how to overcome those. The third thing we want to talk about today is the important responsibility of running a training center that you have and developing your career legacy. And then fourth, we're going to give you examples of, based on my experience across the country, as Ari said, over 20 years of developing strategic business plans for public safety training centers, give you some examples of some of the things that I've seen and learned over that period of time. So let's get into it and get started. I'm going to begin today with the metaphor of the training center. And metaphor is your dream car. you've finally gotten your dream car. Maybe it's a new Corvette or a Porsche 911. It won't be long before you realize it runs on liquid gold. By that I mean you've brought your car home, you've driven it around the neighborhood, you've showed it to your friends and family, and man, it's a real beauty. But now, fast forward 9 months to a year. So now what's happening now is you've got perhaps the first oil change on your dream car, that first 20,000 mile service, and hopefully maybe a fender bender, hopefully not. But that is the metaphor today when we talk about training centers. The same thing is true. Whether you are building one, building a new training center, or are operating one that's been operational for a number of years, one thing is certain. The training center, to operate it, is going to cost you lots of money. It's going to cost you a lot of money, and in my experience, it's probably going to cost you more to operate and manage your training center than you had originally anticipated. Just like with the dream car, with your training center, the fun part was probably at the beginning, if you've got a new center, when you were in the design phase with the architects and planning, and they were coming up with 3D renderings, and we've all seen these virtual full motion flyovers or walk around the training center, watching it being constructed. You know, at that point of the project, you begin to see your training center, your dream of this training center becoming a real reality. Fast forward 9 months later, you know, the grand opening is come and gone, the high fives, back slaps, the news coverage is gone. And now, as with your dream car, you're faced with operating that training center, or with the car metaphor, changing that oil for the first time. You're faced with issues such as you're coming into your first winter and you're discovering you've got roof leaks. Perhaps a recruit has driven through a barrier in your evac track. And what happens more than one time, the specialized equipment that you purchased for the training center, well, the warranty you purchased didn't quite cover all those things that the salesman said it was going to cover. These are some of the things that are going to come up as you operate the training center and as you move forward. As I mentioned, and as Ari mentioned early on, is we're going to talk a lot today about your legacy. We're going to talk a little bit more on that as we get through the presentation, but legacy is going to come up quite often, and it's going to be interwoven throughout the presentation today. But let me just say this, that for the most part, my guess is the audience today are what I would call in the mature stage of your career in public safety. By this I mean you're a middle to senior level manager. You're probably a veteran of the department. The training center, now it may be your last assignment in your career, or perhaps it's a step up the organization within your department. This is what I mean by a mature stage of your career. And if this is the case, I think that this is what we're going to talk about, developing your career legacy. And I strongly feel that your tour, your stay at the training center is really your career legacy moment. Now is your time as the training center manager to really develop the standard of pride, consistency, and tradition within your organization. As we know, training is so vitally important. It's such an integral part of public safety. Being the manager of your training center really sets the bar, in my opinion, for the whole department. But now, related directly to today's presentation, I want to introduce to you a concept that I have been talking about for a real long time. And I am an absolute believer that if you are the manager of your training center, you really have to think of yourself as an entrepreneur or a businessman running a small business. And in this case, the small business is your training center. Going back, and as I mentioned, after the training center is constructed, you're down the line, 6 months, a year out. you're going to start really facing some real money challenges. And now begins the real challenge for you as the training center director, because I always like to say, and I'm sure it's a term that we've all heard throughout the years, as a training center manager, I really think it's incumbent upon you to leave the training center better than you found it. So dealing with overlooked O&M line items, I have seen over the last several years many of the same mistakes being made with regards to budgeting the O&M budget. I break the overall budget, the O&M budget, down into three categories. Number one is ongoing operational cost. Two is safe and secure training delivery costs. And three, future improvement costs. Number one, the ongoing operational cost, pretty straightforward. Cost that you're going to incur every year to pay the utility bills, pay for your training consumables. If it's a fire training center, pay for the propane and the live fire fuel props. If it's a gun range, ventilation systems within the gun range. If it's indoor range, golly, typical number that we use in budgeting for training centers is about $2, $1.50 to $2 per lane per hour of use of the ventilation system at the gun range. So the gun range alone, if it's a 15-lane range, you're operating that ventilation system. It's costing you over $20 an hour just to turn the vents on. As a part of that O&M ongoing costs. The second one is safe and secure training, delivery training costs. You really have to ensure that everything is running at the training center properly, that it's safe, it's efficient, and then you have to prepare for those, as I mentioned, the unexpected damage costs. The recruit drives through a barrier, live fire prop, a little too aggressive on their fire attacks, tears up your tens of thousands, hundreds of $1,000s propane fuel prop. Those things happen in the training environment. The third area that I mentioned was future improvements, cost and budgets. You must always budget to stay ahead in capital equipment, stay ahead in improvements, stay ahead of replacement cost, modernization. In your annual O&M budget, I strongly urge you to make sure that you've got a line item, kind of money that's being put aside for the new modernization of capital equipment. Going back to what I talked about a couple slides ago, and that is thinking like a businessman. Boy, if you've heard my company speak or talk or any of our literature, we preach that sermon. Training center is a business. It is a small business, and you have to take a business approach. With any kind of small business, you're faced with two areas that are absolutely essential to success. But one is generating funding for your training center, and a cost savings plan. Those tie back exactly to the slide that I previously mentioned. You've got to have money to pay for those O&M costs and a way to save money to help pay for the new equipment. As I said, training centers, small business, there really is no difference. You're going to need that kind of a strong budget plan in place really in day one. As we know, in public safety, as with any small business, few things in business are guaranteed, few things in life are guaranteed. Well, let me add a couple. Number one is there is never enough money for training center operations. And another guarantee is the cost of operating the training center will always go up. It won't go down. So today I want to spend a bit of time talking to you about a concept. Again, thinking like a businessman, thinking like an entrepreneur. It's a concept called the Readiness Gap. The Readiness Gap is, as you see on the slide, is that gap between costs and budget, the space between those two errors. The goal as a training center manager is to close those gaps as much as possible by either reducing costs or increasing funding. In today's presentation, I'm going to come up with I'm going to go into detail about those two issues of lowering costs, that is, bringing the upper arrow down, and second, fund generating solutions, which is bringing the lower arrow up. Again, the concept here is to close the gap between costs and budgets, or closing the readiness gap. Today we're going to give you two examples on how to do that. We're going to follow that up with some examples, as I mentioned, things that I've learned in over 20 years in the business of how training centers across the country, real live training centers, are applying real life solutions. We're going to talk about partnerships and cost sharing, and then we're going to talk about utilization of technology. First off, with partnerships and cost sharing, I'm going to give you 4 examples. First one is examples of local public safety, local police, fire, federal agency collaborations, community college collaborations, serving the non-public safety entities, and facility rental. I'm going to go into some detail on some partnerships and cost share in those areas. The first is with police, fire, and federal collaborations. And before I get into the detail and talk about the Glendale facility, let me just add this, that as I've mentioned, we write business plans for public safety training centers. And I'll be honest, I can't remember. I'm a little bit older, so my memory may be fading me a little bit, but I can't remember the last time that we wrote a business plan for a standalone police training center or a standalone fire training center. Budgets just don't allow it. All of the work we're doing now with helping companies plan and visualize a new center are all collaboratives. Police and fire are working together, perhaps within the same city. Multi-fire agencies are working together. Multi-police agencies are working together. Training centers now have become a collaborative issue across the United States. As I said, I can't think of a new training center that we've worked on anyway at my company over the last 5-10 years that didn't have some sort of a partnership arrangement. So one of the examples of that, and I think a fantastic example, is what they're doing out in Glendale, Arizona, at the Glendale Public Safety Training Center. It's a mega center. It's a $25 million facility. They've got an evac track, live fire burn props, shooting range. It's a collaborative issue amongst 4 cities in the greater Glendale area, as well as their local community college. What they've done to collaborate is the city of Glendale is the big city in the region, so far as sworn members. What they do to come up with their O&M cost is to take a percentage, take the number of sworn members of each department and pay according to the size of each department. That's how they come up with the cost share for their O&M. So Glendale, Arizona, the city of, is the largest of the partners. They pay the larger share, and the other departments pay a proportionate share based on the size. Another interesting thing that I think they're doing in Glendale, and I have to tell you, I don't think I've seen it anywhere else in the U.S., is Glendale actually hosts a private enterprise company there at the training center, and it's a healthcare provider center where they do health screenings, pre-employment examinations, located on the site at the training center. So it's a very unique way to generate revenues and to offset some of the O&M. So police fire collaborations, a number of ways of putting those together. What they do in Glendale, it's based on the size of each of the department. By size, I mean number of members. The second way that we've seen in collaborations is collaborations with community colleges. Again, a community college collaboration, in my experience, is a real win-win situation for public safety agencies. But the colleges, if they have revenue, they have an spread revenue source, and that is student tuitions. They have got money coming in from students through by way of tuitions. So joining up and connecting with the community college and your public safety agency is a real win for everyone involved. 3 examples of that I'm going to give you today. The first one is at DuPage Community College, just outside of Chicago. The picture on your screen, that is the indoor scenario village at DuPage, where all weather, 365 days a year, public agencies and the community college can train at their indoor village. What they do there, in addition to the college putting on fire science, criminal justice programs, they allow the local agencies in the region to come and use their facility for training. So once again, a real win for everyone. Another example we've seen is, the first one was a college-owned at DuPage. The second example is an agency-owned facility where agencies, perhaps a city or a county, has built the training center. They own the building. They own the land. They've brought the community college in to be the custodial manager of the day-to-day operations and maintenance of the facility. In exchange for that, the police and fire departments locally, they get first access and get first right on the schedule of the training center. And then the college gets the second position, where they are training their students in fire science and criminal justice programs. The colleges do a wonderful job of maintaining campuses, maintaining classrooms, maintaining facilities. That's what colleges do. So, great example of agency-owned facilities run on a weekly, monthly, annual basis by a community college. The third example of these type of collaborations are agency-owned facilities, where an agency may own the training center, but that the college comes in and uses it, usually for their hands-on practical skills out on the drill ground that the colleges do not have access to. Colleges have access to classrooms, but not necessarily driving track and gun ranges. So the agency is renting space or selling space to the community college to come and use the facility. So those are 3 examples of what I would call community college collaborations. College-owned, agency-owned where the college comes in and uses the facility. Another example of generating revenue is what I call serving non-public safety. These are public safety training centers that are inviting non-public safety entities, departments, or even private industry to their training center to use the facility and renting space to them. A real terrific example was a very large EVOC facility. They wanted to build, the sheriff's office wanted to build a large extension onto their EVOC track. Didn't have the budget for it. No way were they going to get money to build a new section of the track. They connected with the local trade union there that had an apprentice program in heavy equipment operators. The union wanted to train apprentices to become licensed large equipment operators. The union came in and said, hey, we'll plow that new EVOC section for you. We'll plow that new pad for you in exchange for letting our apprentice have the experience of real world, real actual experience of grading land. A great example of a collaboration. The sheriff's office got a new track, and the union got a great training source for their apprentice program. Another area of non-public safety training that I see, and it's just blowing up across the country. Give you an example, or by virtue of, in 2015, earlier this year, the Department of Labor forecasts that there will be, in 2016, there will be a truck driver shortage of 48,000 truck drivers in the United States. Truck driving schools are springing up across the country. There is such a huge demand and such a shortage of truck drivers across the U.S. The Department of Labor has classified it as a key area of need across the country. And public safety agencies are renting their driving tracks or even just their concrete pads to truck driving schools. I've seen it firsthand in Kansas City, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, again in Missouri. Across the country, truck driving schools are renting the space, either the EVOC track or just the large drill pads. Another example of non-public safety is workplace safety training. We know it commonly out here in California as OSHA training. Confined space awareness training, fall protection, trench awareness, OSHA workplace safety courses. Training centers, especially fire centers, usually have got confined space props, trench rescue props, all of those sort of things that industry needs to train their people on, whether they be city or county utility workers or construction companies, highway companies. All of those workers need the specialized workplace training. And for the most part, I would say if you've got a fire training center, you've probably got the props that those folks would like to use. The next area that I've seen is kind of a fun one, I think, is revenue generation, is renting your facility out to television folks. People in entertainment, they need wide open spaces. They want a secure location, perhaps to shoot commercials, perhaps to shoot television shows. Training centers are a secure area. They're fenced. Out in the drill ground area, there are wide open spaces. They can get a lot of camera shots out there. If it's an EVOC track, I've been told, I'm not confirmed this, but I've been told that many of the automobile commercials we see on television these days, many of them are shot at public safety EVOC tracks. So that BMW you see flying around the Swiss Alps may very well have been shot out in San Bernardino, California on their EVOC track. And they put in the green screen behind it to fill in the mountains. So renting your training center out for television shoots, television commercials, product demonstrations, companies that have got products that they want to show demonstrations, they need open, wide spaces. Think about renting your facility out to those kind of folks as well. So I want to come back around. I've given you some examples of ways people are working together, the way they are collaborating together, and some of the ways that they're generating their revenue. Again, the idea here is to close the gap, close the readiness gap, close the areas between the budget and cost. And to do this, you want to bring the gap closer together. You do that by generating revenue and cost share scenarios. So again, bring those two arrows closer together. Another way that we could talk, or we are going to talk about closing the gap, is actually saving money and reducing your operational cost of training centers. I said early on, training centers cost a lot of money. They cost a lot of money to operate and manage just because things happen at training centers. Unexpected things happen, costs are incurred. But another way, a way of reducing that readiness gap is to generating or saving money. A couple of ways that I've seen across the U.S. of departments that are actually saving money and generating revenue is selling their training content. Perhaps it's training content that your instructors have developed for your own department. You can sell that training to other agencies using your own platform to sell it, to help you recoup at least your production costs of putting those training classes out there. You can sell them off of your own website, or there are other areas, such as a website that I'm very familiar with called First Forward. They are a marketplace for courseware providers. If you have courseware, put it on First Forward, and you can actually sell your content to other agencies. So much of what training you're doing does have applicability across state lines, across county lines, because a lot of it is in-service annual training that many departments can use. And I must say that there are several out there right now today that are doing just that. Out of Indiana, for example, they're selling their content, as we show here on the chart, across the U.S. because, again, it's courseware that's been developed by the agency that are generating revenue by selling it. Another way to save money at the training center is digital record keeping. I think it goes without saying the importance of well-documented record keeping at the training center and of your training classes. However, maintaining proper training records, it's a very large expense, and especially if you're not doing it efficiently. Notice in the screen here the filing cabinet with the pages stuffed. That's pretty inefficient in this day and age. One way to reduce these expenses is to digitize your training records. It makes the records much easier to access, much quicker to recover, to find. And as we know, unfortunately, if there is an accident or a problem out on the drill ground or out in the field, the very first thing that happens is that they seize your training records. I can't stress enough the importance of well-kept training records, and I also can't stress enough of how inefficient the old paper records are. So take a hard look at digitizing your records. Give you an example. Out in Utah, at Utah Post, they reported that they at one time spent 2,200 hours a year, 2,200 man-hours a year maintaining their training records. They've now digitized those records and reduced that 2,200 down to about 1 hour a year of maintenance. So it's something, if you haven't done, you really should take a hard look at. I've given you a couple examples of revenue generation, selling your time and training, and digitizing your training records. So going back to my old favorite chart of the day here is, I've given you some examples how to take the large gap and making it smaller, bringing it together so that we can get the gap closed. That's something I think that every training center manager needs to, if you're not doing it now, really take a hard look at it. One additional thing I want to throw in, because I personally think it's really, really important. It's not a direct cost saver or revenue generator, but again, thinking like a businessman, it's just good business. When budgets get squeezed, you're going to need your community support. So why not get the community involved in your training center? Do things like host Red Cross classes out at the training center, maybe blood drives, maybe make it the start and stop point location of your charity walk, the 5K, the 10K walk or run within your community. Making the training center available to the community will bring you such long-term benefits. And another little side benefit, as the young man here is having a lot of fun on that hose line, you may in fact find the next generation of first responders. So I think it's a good thing. It's from a business perspective, you're not generating money, you're not saving money. I just think it's good business. So, kind of wrapping things up today, I just want to say that, as I mentioned, if you're a training center manager, this could be your last assignment in the department, or maybe it's a career advancement position on your way up the organization. If it's either case, you really should treat the training center assignment as a true career legacy moment. Because in training, it's your time. The training manager sets the pride, consistency, and tradition within the organization. And the training centers in public safety are so important to that. I would even go far as to say that training is a key element in everything the first responder does. And somebody would say that training is the most important element of the public safety and the first responder. So a well-funded operational training center, it's not only important, it's vital to your department. The training center really is the catalyst for your department and all the surrounding departments as well. By the way, mutual aid, coordinated response. And golly, unfortunately with the events last week in San Bernardino, we saw an example of folks that had really, really trained well together. It was in the middle of a tragedy. It was a very well coordinated response, and that just didn't happen. It happened as a result of training. So in closing, I just want to say, bringing the positive impact of your training center into the community, it brings a sense of pride to your community. If the folks out there know that you got a training center that's top-notch, first class, it really gives the citizens a real sense of pride and confidence in the public safety department. And golly, that's really a good thing. So with that, I think that's the end of my formal talk. I just want to say training costs will always go up. Training budgets are continually under pressure, and unexpected things happen at a training center. If you're there, let's leave it better than you found it. So with that, Ari, I'll turn it back to you if we have any questions.
Thank you, Bill, for this talk. We have a few questions coming in from folks, and just to remind you all that are on the webcast, you can type your question in the lower left-hand corner of your screen in the little box there, and if you hit send after that, our team here will be compiling those questions and getting them to the speaker. Bill, first question here, how do I forecast O&M costs when the training center is new? For example, how do I know how to budget for things like consumables or utility costs?
Start with utility costs first. The big utility costs many times are in your classroom building, your classroom office building. Go to the city facilities department. They will have a number. They will say, in our city, to heat or air condition a building, it costs $4 a square foot. That's typical on average for an office building in your area. So putting together the cost for the utilities of the training center, borrow on what other city buildings are doing. You've got offices, you've got cubicles, you've got air conditioning, so does everyone else in your city. Find out what it's costing those cities to operate. But with regards to consumables, if you're, for example, at a live fire burn props, the manufacturers of those props, they're going to know how much fuel is used to light up one of their props, 50 gallons, 100 gallons, 200 gallons. They're going to know how much fuel it takes. You're going to know what the propane costs are in your area. It's real simple multiplication. If you're going to light it up 3 or 4 times during a class, you can come up with the fuel cost in there. Again, first year, look at it. My recommendation would be to put all of these in a line item in the first year's budget, review them at the end of the first year to see how close you came.
Thank you, Bill. Another question that came in, what are the liability issues of having outside users at your training center?
Oh, that's a good question. It always comes up. There are liability issues, and I don't think there's any way of getting around that. There is liability issues with any enterprise. I think we can hedge on that a little bit or get a little bit ahead of that issue at a training center, because if another agency is coming to your center to either use your driving track or your live fire burn props, the liability issue comes as a result of negligence. If your equipment is operating, it's in good working order, then the equipment will not be negligent. So therefore that helps. The other thing is, I would strongly recommend, if you're letting anybody onto your drill ground to use any of your props, that you assign someone from your staff to be there and be the safety officer. and have the authority going in that person can shut down that training class at any time he sees anyone doing something they're not supposed to be doing. So kind of a long answer. The short answer is anybody can sue anybody. I think you can hedge your bets by having a good operating equipment and having a safety officer there at the drill ground.
Thank you, Bill. I got another question in from our audience. Someone is asking, I know lots of training organizations look for places to hold classes. Is there a national list to get on so that all organizations know where we are geographically and they can contact us to come to our center? In other words, how do we broadcast out our location and the facilities that we have available? Is there some sort of national list for that?
I don't know of a national list per se, although I would tell you this, that if at minimum you do not have a Facebook page for your training center, get one. Get one today. Get one this afternoon. If your department has a Facebook page, that's great. Get a separate page, perhaps linked to that department page. Set up a Facebook page for the training center. And be disciplined enough that every week you're posting something. Maybe set up every Wednesday morning. I'm going to post up the activities that are taking place at the training center. It's a matter of publicity, of getting the word out there as to what you're doing every day. That's one way of doing it. Another way to do it is, if I could speak a little bit about my company, Interact Business Group, we do publish a monthly newsletter. If you have resources at your training center, our newsletter goes out to about 10,000 public safety training professionals every month. Could be a good way to get your word out there to other like-minded training center people.
Thank you, Bill. We got another one. What are some of the unexpected costs you have seen that were missed or should have been added into the budget?
I mentioned in the talk, I mentioned the gun range ventilation system. It is interesting to me how many times that has been underestimated. The ventilation system, changing of the filters, operating an indoor gun range is an expensive proposition. Take a real hard look at those numbers as you move into the operational phase, and talk to the manufacturers of that equipment, of the ventilation equipment and the targeting systems, because I find that to be many times underestimated. The cost to operate an indoor range is huge. And then, as I mentioned in my talk, you have to plan for the unknown. There's no 2 days that are the same at a training center. Every day is different. An EVOC class that you held yesterday could go well without a problem. Today, someone runs over a barrier and knocks out a light pole. Hard to do, but you've almost got to have an emergency fund set up. I would start in the initial budget for your O&M to make that a line item and add to it as you can going forward, but definitely make it a line item.
Thank you, Bill. In regards to the previous question, the person who was trying to find a sort of centralized list, I might also suggest that they look at the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, IADLIS. Now, that is specifically law enforcement geared, but they have communications mechanisms out to almost every training center in the United States, and a lot of people subscribe to their email list. And therefore, it's a way to start to get the word out to folks as well. Bill, another question here. It says the person is asking, I'm a public safety department. How can I charge for training or use of my training center? So how do I actually charge for that?
That is, frankly, many times that's the number one question. Hey, I'm a public agency. How can I charge money for something that the government taxpayers have bought for me, have paid for? It's a good example. First of all, go to your city or your county, go to the finance department, and see if they have a funding mechanism to receive funds. I'm going to say they probably do. They are selling services on the city or county level. Talk to finance. Understand that they have a budget to do that sort of thing. Try to get what is referred to many times as an enterprise fund set up within your city or county. An enterprise fund is a separate, nothing more than a separate account number, an accounting number, that money can be deposited into when it's received at the training center. The enterprise fund stays, it is designated for the training center and can be used to build up your cash account at the training center. Secondly, I'm asked, well, wait a minute, I'm a government agency, how can I charge people money? It's a bit of a fine line here, but you're not really making a profit off of what we're doing here. When I talked in the presentation about selling content, what you're doing there is you're recovering costs to develop the content. It's a cost recovery type of a way of bringing money into the center versus selling a product and making a profit. You're not really making a profit. You are retrieving or recovering costs. That's the way that it is done and can be done. It's a cost recovery mechanism. That safety officer that's out on the drill ground, his salary is going to be paid whether he's out on the drill ground acting as a safety officer or is somewhere else in the training center or somewhere on staff. He's going to pay, the citizens are paying his salary. And if today he happens to be overlooking or watching a class that's taking place, his salary is also being paid. That salary should be recoverable.
That's an excellent point, Bill. Thank you for making that, because one could assume that almost any cost that is associated with public safety training, that someone might use a facility, a driving track, a classroom, one way of booking those dollars into the training center is basically as a cost recovery mechanism, not as revenue. And that's a very important distinction in how a lot of these training centers are managing that piece of it. Another question here that was asked by someone, I'm a small department. How can I stay on top of what other training centers are doing? And before I turn it over to you, Bill, one of the things absolutely to do is to be part of the NLearn list, at least if you're in the law enforcement space. NLearn stands for National Law Enforcement Academy Resource Network. It is also part of the IADLIS group, and they connect all law enforcement training centers in the United States together. So you can get their news bulletins and stay on top of what's happening in law enforcement there. Bill, do you have other thoughts on how a small department can stay on top of what training centers are doing and also innovative ideas?
I think that you mentioned IADLIS. There is another organization called ILETA, International Law Enforcement. God, I'm sorry, guys, if there's any ILETA.
It's the Trainers Association.
The Trainers Association. I'm sorry if there's any ILETA members out there. Maybe you can help me with the acronym. It's the ILETA group, and it's training managers for law enforcement. Boy, it's a great organization. I mean, it's real grassroots. They do a great job. They have a conference every April in the Chicago area. It's a wonderful organization. Before we get off today, I'll get that acronym, but it's another one of those law enforcement training groups that does a lot of good work out there with regards to letting people know what training is available, in addition to IADLIS.
Thank you, Bill. Another question that's come in, how can I promote my training center to the community and other departments or private companies?
I mentioned the Facebook page. It may seem a little bit, come on, Facebook, that's for posting pictures of my kids' birthday parties. Facebook has got company pages now, and set up a company page for the training center specifically and post to it. Post pictures. Tell people what's going on. Reach out to your service clubs in the community, the Rotary Club, the Optimists Club, that are putting on these races. Make yourself known out in your community that, hey, you're open, you're available. Come and use my training center for the start or stop of the 10K race this year. It won't be long, and I feel it won't be long before they find you. Once they know you're open and you're available and you're willing and you're holding first aid classes, Red Cross classes, perhaps CPR classes, I think it won't take long for the word to get out there that the training center is a friend of ours and we should give them a phone call.
That's excellent, Bill. Thank you so much. And with that, we're going to wrap up. I have a couple of just housekeeping items for all of you that have been on the call or anyone who registered. We will be sending out a link to the recording of this webinar to everyone. As you exit out of the room here, please fill out our brief survey. We want to hear from you about how you like this particular topic, and also, but most important, other topics you would like for us to find a subject matter expert on and bring that person here to speak to you. So give us your ideas. Finally, as we look at innovation in public safety, especially as it relates to dealing with training center sustainability, if any of you have ideas or have seen models that work, please email those to us. We want to know about them because ultimately we will compile a lot of these ideas into a white paper that can be sent to all the training centers in the United States. So thank you very much for attending, Bill. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your time today, and we will look forward to seeing all of you at our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ari.